Welcome to our second keynote of the week of Stormwater Awareness Week 2023, and I'm really excited about this. I'm your host, John Teravskis with WGR Southwest, and I'm really excited to have my guest with us for this event. What we're going to be talking about today is which permit does my project need? And we're addressing Attachment J of the new Construction General Permit. And we're going to be taking a look at the requirements of that. Brandon Roosenboom with the State Water Board is going to be helping us navigate that. And then we have 4 different regional boards or individuals from 4 different regional boards that are going to be talking about what will that look like in their region. So joining us today is Narissa Schrader with Region 4. And Narissa, you want to say hi to everybody?
Good morning, everyone. This is Narissa Schrader from the Los Angeles Regional Board.
Great. And then Jorge Beltran with Central Valley Region 5.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jorge Beltran with Region 5.
And Jim Carolan with Lahontan, Region 6, South Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, this is Jim Carolan with Lahontan from South Lake Tahoe. Good morning.
All right. And finally, Erica Ryan with San Diego Region 9.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Erica Ryan with the San Diego Water Board Region 9.
All right, and welcome panelists. So before we get further, just a little bit of a disclaimer here. This presentation is meant to be informational and is not comprehensive. The views expressed in this presentation are the views of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the State Water Resources Control Board or any of the regional water quality control boards. The State Water Board does not guarantee the accuracy of the information included in this presentation, accepts no responsibility for consequences of its use. Terminology used may not necessarily be consistent with the State Water Board's official terms. For specific permit questions, it is always best to contact the State Water Board or your local regional water quality control board, and we provide the website there. So with that again, I'm going to welcome our guest, and I'm going to start by talking with Brandon about this Attachment J. Brandon, this is brand new, and this attachment is addressing a topic called dewatering. Now, what is dewatering?
That's right. So Attachment J is brand new to the Construction General Permit, and it's actually parsed out into 4 sections similar to other attachments in the 2022 Construction Stormwater General Permit, which define the scope of the activity, our regulatory authorization for that activity, general requirements for it, and the monitoring and reporting requirements. So Section A of Attachment J defines dewatering as the mechanical pumping or siphoning of non-potable water from sources including, but not limited to, excavations, trenches, foundations, vaults, groundwater removal specifically related to the construction activities, and or other water collected in impoundments such as ponds, puddles, low points on the site, and other similar areas of accumulation. That said, per Section 8.1, if any of those dewatering discharges are regulated under a separate permit issued by the state or regional water boards, the discharger is required to obtain coverage under that applicable permit.
Okay, and that's why we have our regional board panelist here. But first, let's just talk about those projects that would then fall under Attachment J, and then we'll circle back and we'll talk about what those other NPDES permits might look like for individuals. But when you were defining dewatering, I noticed you used the word water. That's kind of a broad category. Could dewatering be just stormwater, or is it just what I mean? Many of us think of it as being groundwater. I even remember you and I having a dialogue, maybe a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you were surprised that I was surprised by the definition of dewatering. So could it be just stormwater that you were pumping out of these trenches or low spots?
That is correct. Dewatering refers to either groundwater or stormwater in the terms of Attachment J.
Okay, so this year, we had what, 12 atmospheric rivers happening, and they're saying this year's going to be El Nino, so we may have a equally wet winter. A very common thing is when I'd show up to a project to do an inspection would be I would see the contractor pulling out a pump, a trash pump, or a pneumatic pump out of their shed to pump off some low spots. And usually our concern is, whoa, hold on. We need some BMPs. You can't just pump that into the drain inlet. We need BMPs there. So now we might have a little more to communicate with them, like, wait, we need a permit. We need, so are we talking about that kind of dewatering?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we included attachment J primarily was to address kind of a regulatory gap between any regional water board permits and the that may not be regulating dewatering, especially for stormwater. And so the instance that really came to mind when we were developing these requirements would be dewatering a retention basin of some sort that accumulates stormwater. And having some sort of mechanism to monitor for that, especially when they're releasing large volumes of stormwater. But as we'll get into, there are very similar requirements for demonitoring between a dewatering discharge and just the typical stormwater discharge monitoring. Right.
And yeah, and I think that's what we really want to clarify in this workshop, or to underscore, is that a lot of people they're when they hear the word dewatering, they're thinking of two things. Well, usually groundwater, but we have reactionary dewatering, where we're digging a deep utility trench and water's flowing into it, and we need to get rid of that so we can install the piping. The second would be we're digging a deep foundation for a building, and we know the groundwater is going to be somewhere in that area. So we do proactive dewatering, where wells are put in to dewater to depress the groundwater level so that you can do your construction project. So we are including those, but now we're including other things, as we were just talking about. It could be commingled groundwater and stormwater, or it could be 100% stormwater as well.
Right.
And I believe the caveat is it has to be pumped or through some mechanical means like siphoning or something like that.
That's correct. And then I did want to add that the requirements of attachment J are specifically for discharges related to dewatering. And so if the water that is being pumped around is not being discharged from the site, then attachment J doesn't necessarily apply. So a lot of instances, people will allow, dischargers will pump their water to a retention basement, at which point we would not require these specific monitoring requirements and reporting requirements.
Which makes sense, because NPDES permits are for discharges to waters of the U.S.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So let's just, for now, assume a project is subject to attachment J. Let's assume there is no other applicable regional board permit. So for those projects finding themselves subject to just attachment J, what do they need to do?
So there are, as I mentioned before, parts or sections to attachment J. Section B includes the general requirements for dewatering activities. The discharger has to comply with the receiving water limitations, which are identified in the order of the permit, which means that they should be implementing best management practices to address any pollutants that may be present in or caused by the dewatering activity. So this may involve pre-treatment best management practices to achieve that required water quality. Other than that, the discharger is required to do their due diligence when dewatering in areas that may be contaminated, whether that be the soil or groundwater. And discharges are prohibited from dewatering in areas with known soil and groundwater contamination or groundwater contamination. And these can be determined using tools such as GeoTractor or by contacting the local regional water board or other local permitting authorities.
Now, when you say they're prohibited from dewatering in an area where they know they have groundwater contamination, we're talking about prohibited under the construction general permit. Not that they can't dewater, but they probably will need another permit, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, all right, yeah. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no problem. And then I also wanted to say that additionally, the discharger is required to draw water from the surface of their impoundment unless it's infeasible to do so. I know a lot of dewatering that occurs in trenches might be through like kind of a sump. So it's harder to take from the surface of the water in that instance. But other than that, best management practices should be implemented to dissipate energy from the outlet of the dewatering mechanism. And that could be some combination of, riprap, wattles, check dams, just to name a few, as to not cause further erosion at the outlet of the dewatering system, because a lot of times those are highly concentrated flows, right? And then remember, we're trying to slow the flow wherever possible. So I'm also aware that some dewatering operations utilize tanks as well to store water and settle out solids. So that's another potential best management practice that could be implemented to comply with attachment J. And then lastly, I wanted to say that the dewatering system has to be capable of ceasing operation should monitoring results indicate that the discharge is not compliant with the permit's numeric action levels or discharge prohibitions. And that ability to cease operation can either be automated. So if you have an automated sampler attached to the dewatering system, and that's set to shut off the system if the turbidity or numeric action, or the turbidity or pH numeric action levels are exceeded, or that you can have on-site personnel be monitoring and shut off the system that way as well.
Okay. Yeah, and going back to those VMPs, I think this is one of the first times I've seen, at least in a California construction general permit, mention of skimming. I know, anybody who's done their SESWI or CPAS or one of those national programs, they talk a lot about skimming. I think this is one of the first times we've seen mention of it in an official permit. Which makes sense because the cleaner water is usually there at the surface.
That's exactly our intent.
Yeah. And then, of course, if passive treatment is being used, we have a whole nother attachment that just addresses that as well.
That's correct.
All right. So now shutting it down, you mentioned that you have to have the ability to shut it down either automatically or by a person that is there. Now, there are all sorts of different scenarios. What happens when you don't have the ability to do that? Maybe your watershed is so great or the storm event is so huge and holding water is either not possible or maybe causing a public safety issue. What's done in that situation?
So we do have a provision within the attachment J that if the dewatering discharge is occurring to protect human life and or health, or to prevent severe property damage, and inadvertently exceeds the numeric action levels, the discharger must notify the regional water boards and any applicable like MS4 municipal separate stormwater sewage system operators within 24 hours of that discharge occurring.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I guess also these numeric action level, do the same NALs apply?
Yeah, so there really isn't a difference for when it comes to the numeric action levels that apply to the dewatering discharges versus the typical stormwater discharges. So per section C of attachment J, the discharger must analyze dewatering discharges for turbidity and pH. For turbidity, the discharge must not exceed 250 NTU, and for pH, the discharge must be between the range of 6.5 to 8.5. So the only difference for dewatering discharges is that the discharge must cease, or the dewatering operation must cease until corrective actions are implemented, so that the discharge complies with those discharge requirements.
And as we see with other monitoring with this new permit, it's a single point, right? It's one instance of pH exceedance or one instance of turbidity exceedance. Okay. And then if that happens, they need to notify the water board?
Correct. There is a through a similar process by filing an ad hoc report in SMARTS. I believe within 10 days of the exceedance is required in attachment J. And I did want to take a moment actually to highlight that attachment J does not specify that risk level 1 and risk type 1 sites are exempt from the monitoring requirements in attachment J, as they are for stormwater discharge monitoring in attachments D and E. So based on my interpretation of attachment J, all dischargers should be monitoring dewatering discharges regardless of their risk level.
Oh, that I did not catch on to that. I did not see that. So that means us SWIP writers, QSDs, we need to pay attention if we're doing a construction site monitoring program in our SWIP and we're risk level 1, and we realize that they will have dewatering activity, we need to make them aware that they'll need to test for pH and turbidity. And as we were talking about earlier, you have your obvious dewatering, planned, or you're going to go deep, you're going to have some issues. But you have these sites, as I mentioned, and I think it was probably most sites last winter, at some point, somebody was dragging a pump out to move some water off site, to get access to the site, to be able to work. They had a small sediment basin that they had to pump off. So many sites may find themselves in this situation. And many risk level 1s, even if it's not entirely planned, might find themselves needing to be ready to test then for pH and turbidity. Okay. That's an important takeaway here, because I didn't put 2 and 2 together. So, all right. Well, yeah. What do you expect then to see in the SWIPs for projects that are doing dewatering?
It is not quite, or how should I say, the attachment J doesn't really provide strict details on what needs to be incorporated in the SWIP with regard to attachment to the dewatering activities. So in my interpretation, simply including a dewatering section in the SWIP would be sufficient. The section should describe the best management practices that are being implemented, the inspection protocols, corrective actions, monitoring protocols, and monitoring locations, as well as the reporting for that particular site. And if the qualified SWIP developer is feeling particularly detail oriented, maintenance of the dewatering system can be included in there as well. If complying with a separate permit for dewatering discharges per the regional water boards or certain state water board permits, the discharger is required to indicate that applicable permit in their stormwater pollution prevention plan.
Okay. All right. And that brings up a topic that I definitely wanted to talk about this morning is, a lot of dischargers, just tracking the construction general permit is a challenge. But now they need to know what region they're in and whether another permit exists. And I have found that to not be really always straightforward. How can they determine if they're in another region? So maybe you can tell our viewers on how to know what region you're in. And the second thing is how to know if there's another permit that would apply to them.
So I definitely sympathize with that, because I've had a hard time myself finding the applicable permits that may regulate dewatering discharges. So for the time being, I do recommend either, first, as a first line of defense, I guess, or first action, I recommend researching per regional water board the applicable dewatering permits, and those should be available on their websites. And so if you go to the state water board websites, there is a little tab that allows you to identify which regional water board your project may be located in, and then will direct you to their regional water board website. And then the other, I would say the second course of action would be to just contact the stormwater staff at the regional water boards, and those contacts can be found in either attachment C of the 2022 construction stormwater general permit or on our state water board construction stormwater program webpage. And so I do know right now that the State Water Board does have a utility vault NPDES permit and a natural gas NPDES permit, which do regulate dewatering activities related to those activities themselves. And then State Water Board staff are working on developing a 2022 construction stormwater general permit frequently asked questions webpage that we definitely intend to include a list of the potentially applicable permits. And then the frequently asked questions webpage should be available within the next 2 months.
Okay. And I've noticed that sometimes it's even difficult for me to determine which regional board a project's in, especially when they're on the border, you know, like out in the California Delta, where you're in between Region 2 and Region 5. How can a discharger know for sure what regional board they're in?
There is a map tool on the State Water Board website. When you do click on that regional water board link, and then you can either type your, I believe, your latitude and longitude coordinates for the site or the address, and it should direct you to the regional water board boundary. That boundary is also available in like RTMDL map tool. So that's another way that you can determine that. And then if you know a WDID was already issued for this particular site and you're joining late or something, the WDID also indicates in the first letter, I believe, or first number, the regional water board.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to be very, very important. In fact, I've been working on a new SWIP template for the 2022 CGP. And I noticed one of the things that wasn't necessarily required was to identify your regional board. And I decided to put that into my template just to make things like this a little more straightforward, so they know, oh, I need to look at the Central Valley's potential permits. All right. Well, great. So you're going to be providing some information, maybe some helpful information later to be able to at least point them in the right direction as far as who might need a permit.
Yep.
All right. Well, that brings us to our panelists, and what I really wanted to hear from, and I enjoyed the road shows. When you were doing the road shows, you went to different regional boards, and it was really interesting to get the two perspectives from the state board and then the regional board. Individuals usually were also commenting. And so we've invited 4 of the 9 regional boards to have a representative here. And we're going to take them in numerical order as far as, you know, their region. So I guess our first lowest number is Region 4, and that's Narissa. Narissa, let me bring you up here, spotlight you, so folks can see you a little bit better. So, all right, Narissa, you're with. Tell us a little bit about what you do with Region 4, and a little bit about Region 4's stormwater program before we jump into the details.
Sure. Yeah, I am with the Stormwater Compliance and Enforcement unit in Region 4. Region 4 is the Los Angeles Regional Board, of course, and we manage the industrial and construction general permit by the entire unit, and we inspect and issue enforcement as necessary, of course. So we also do have another enforcement group that is also involved with conducting additional enforcement.
Okay.
And yeah.
Well, welcome, and thank you for being a part of the panel today. And we're going to field these questions to each of the regional boards, but interested to know what permit or permits does Region 4 have that might apply to what Brandon was talking about with dewatering?
Yeah, so Los Angeles Regional Board has what we call is the regional dewatering permit, and it's a general NPDES permit, and I can provide the specific information, but it is a current order for dewatering discharges of groundwater from construction and project dewatering activities. and discharge to surface waters. This is to regulate all dewatering activities within our regional board.
Okay.
And the dewatering activities that are covered under the permit would be any dewatering activity that involves pumping of groundwater or commingled stormwater and groundwater via mechanical means and discharging to surface water. The activities permitted include dewatering from ongoing construction dewatering or permanent dewatering from completed construction sites.
Okay.
Generally, the region does not issue permit for natural or gravity flows type of discharges.
Okay. So I heard you mention groundwater. I also heard you mention dewatering from construction activities. There's a little bit of gray area in there. Are you defining dewatering consistent with what Brandon said as far as State Water Board? If it's a puddle that's 100% stormwater, would that require permitting under a separate NPDES permit with your region?
We deal with it site, depending on site conditions, specifically what Brandon mentioned. If there's groundwater contamination beneath the site and what the situation might be. Otherwise, if we just say that it's fully stormwater and it's a puddle, don't know what really a puddle means, whether how many feet, inches deep. In terms of just straight ground stormwater, I believe it will be subject to attachment J.
Okay.
But I just want to throw it out that we do have an existing dewatering permit at the Los Angeles region that have been used. And there are construction sites that have both the CGP and the dewatering permit.
Okay. So clearly the classical definition of dewatering, like I said, reactive or proactive dewatering, clearly that's going to need a separate NPDES permit. Discharging 100% stormwater sounds like it could, but it might not. How would maybe a SWIP writer, QSD, who's anticipating that they may have this type of activity, how would they know for sure? Would they need to just refer someone to the regional board and say, if you're going to do this activity, you should see if there's applicability?
Sure, yeah. Consistent with the requirement in attachment J, the best thing to do would probably just consult with us that, hey, we have this site and we have this nuances of the site. What we're finding is every site is different. They're set up differently, different lay of the land and whatnot. So we do need to understand the site specific conditions and whether we would have them go the attachment J route, or it would be best for them to go with the regional permit. And mainly because Region 4 is highly urbanized, and we do get a lot of complaints from the community. So we are just trying to avoid anything like that will bring too much spotlight, for the site.
Okay. Let's assume right now that they determined they do need this separate NPDES permit. What's the process like in applying for that and obtaining that permit? What's involved, and how long does it take to get a permit like that?
To obtain coverage under the general permit and notice of intent, application and applicable documents can be downloaded from our website, and I can provide the link on that website on chat later on, or to you, John. And then they just have to complete the application and submit with the application fees. And again, there's a link to the application fee on our website. It takes 30 to 45 days after the application is submitted. And we're talking about completed application, all PRDs and all the required documentation are submitted with the fee. And that would be an enrollment under the general NPDES dewatering permit.
Okay, do you require analytical data with that application?
Yes, analytical data of representative groundwater or commingled stormwater sample from the site is required to be submitted, and it can be submitted as provided on the link on our website as well.
Okay, so of course that begs the question, if it's a construction site, I don't have representative data until it's generated. So really I'm going to need to be able to access that water to sample, and then it'll be 30 to 45 days after that at the earliest that I can actually discharge. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I'm gonna have to reach out to our program. It's a different program in our office that issues dewatering permit. So I would probably touch base with them on what, in this situation, what do they do? And what's their process in the past, historically, when they situation like what you described, John. I would probably ask them, how do you deal with, no analytical data, at the point that they're trying to discharge? Yes.
Yeah, and I believe that's the case with most regional boards. That's actually a different department that issues these permits. So we're dealing with this, we're talking with stormwater individuals, but it's actually a different group in many cases that is issuing these. And then sometimes I understand that the reason it takes so long is just staffing. It's just it takes time to get these through. Well, Narissa, thank you. I want to allow time for our other regional boards. I'm going to go next in order. It would be Jorge. So thank you very much. Let me remove that pin and bring Jorge to the forefront here. Right here. Hey, Jorge, thank you for being a part of Stormwater Awareness Week. Kind of the same questions to you. So what permits does Region 5 Central Valley have? I think you're the biggest region of the 9 regional boards. And what permits are out there, and what's the process for getting them, and who needs it? Who needs it?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Jorge Beltran. I'm with Region 5 Sacramento. I'm the Compliance and Enforcement Unit. I am the lead construction stormwater inspector for our region. And yes, anytime we get a question about dewatering, the first question I ask the discharger is, what are you doing with this water, right? And I am specifically referring to groundwater dewatering, because if it's impounded stormwater, it's perfectly fine and not reaching to discharge it under the construction general permit.
So under attachment J.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So then when it comes to groundwater, then the question is to the discharges, where are you planning to discharge it? And then it takes, 2 different routes. If it's going onto surface waters or discharges that are regulated by another NPDES permit, and could be an MS4 permit, or it could be directly to surface waters, then we send them in one direction to our NPDES unit, who under the limited threat discharge permit would issue a permit for those discharges, or then the MS4 would approve those discharges under whatever conditions they deem reasonable.
Okay.
That's one way. If they're going to discharge these onto land, then we refer them to our discharge to land unit, which I think is Title 27-915 unit. And there they may be able to qualify for a waiver, or they may actually need to be enrolled under the permit for this.
Now, can I ask a clarification question? This might be just the consultant in me, but discharge to land is not an NPDES permit, right? It's a waste discharge requirements. So technically, would that, now that still might be required, but doesn't that fall outside of the scope of attachment J?
It does, in the sense that at which point, the CGP is no longer applicable, but you still, like you said earlier, you still need to deal with other units in the regional board.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have to get their approval for the discharges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like if it's 100% stormwater, then you just follow attachment J.
Correct.
And if it's groundwater or probably commingled groundwater, I imagine, then
Correct.
you may need this limited threat NPDES permit if you're discharging waters US. And even if you're discharging land, you might need a separate WDR. What's the process in your region for getting the limited threat?
It's an application, and typically it's maybe, I think I got 3 weeks at, the time for approval. It varies, but at least a minimum of 3 weeks turnaround.
Okay. Okay, so this can't be a knee-jerk reaction, but the good thing is your region is allowing stormwater to be under attachment J, and I would think that is the most impromptu of the discharges, and that groundwater is usually something QSD could almost anticipate. So there should be time to plan for that.
Yes, I would think so.
All right, and I believe your region also requires analytical results to be submitted.
Yes, it does. It's part of the application.
Okay, so you might have to get a hydropunch rig out there or something to get groundwater samples if you're doing pre-project.
Right.
All right. Anything else we should know about your region?
Oh, well, one question. If you're going to need to dewater your site, my suggestion is contact your regional board. Send me an email, send me a call, tell me about your project. I'll be able to direct you to the right units for you to consult.
All right. And people can find that information right on the State Water Board's website. If you go look at the map, each region's identified. So thank you, Jorge.
Sure.
Yeah, we're going to bring up our next panelist. So let me introduce. This is going to be Region 6, Jim Carolan. All right, let me put the spotlight on you now. All right, Jim, thank you for joining us. Now, you are with the Lahontan. Now, Lahontan is a very interesting region because you got different areas. You're particularly, I believe, from South Lake Tahoe? You're muted there. Go ahead and unmute.
Oh,
there you are.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jim Carolan. I am in the North Basin Regulatory and Enforcement Unit, and our area extends from the Oregon border to Conway Summit, so just north of Mono Lake. If you're located to the south of Conway Summit, you'll be working with our Victorville office staff.
All right. Well, welcome. And you've heard the dialogue we've had with the other regional boards. So how does dewatering, first off, how do you define it in your region? We've heard now 2 different regions that define it slightly differently. What approach is your regional board taking?
Our dewatering is comprehensive, and it not only includes groundwater, stormwater, it could be hydrostatic testing water from fire hydrants or utility commissioning. So it's very broad. So the one kind of take-home message that I want to relay to people is dewatering in the Lahontan region is both very complicated, and it takes a fair amount of logistical and financial commitment. It's much easier to reach out to the stormwater staff initially to talk about the permitting, the scope of work, and how we can kind of focus that to make the permitting as smooth as possible. So it is really a case-by-case basis. One thing I want to let people know is the triggers for attachment A, i.e. discharge, pretty much matches our discharges, our triggers for you can't use attachment A, you have to use our dewatering permit. So it's really important, if we can, work through the scope of work and the project scoping to see if we can infiltrate water on site so that we can basically help that discharger or that project implementer minimize permitting time and permitting fees. So we really want to work the discharger to basically work through their scope of work before we kind of work through the permitting. And just to kind of relay that, our typical sequencing is, can we keep it on site and infiltrate it, which is by far the most desirable outcome. Number 2, if you do need to discharge and it's going to a surface water body or an MS4, you need to utilize our dewatering permit. Our dewatering permit takes 30 days to process. If we don't process it within those 30 days, it's considered active. The kicker is analyticals are required. California toxic rules, analytes are required, and that's a very extensive and very expensive list. If you fail on any of those criteria and have an exceedance, you have to go to an individual NPDES permit. So it becomes very difficult very quickly, which is why we really try to work with project implementers to do infiltration on site.
Okay. So again, for those classic dewatering, we can anticipate that activity. But I have to believe that most sites have somebody that drags out a pump at some point during the season. What happens in your region if an inspector finds a laborer that dragged out a pump just so that they could actually get to the trailer, the office trailer?
Yes.
What do you expect there? And if you do inspect a site like that, what would happen to that person?
So if it's being infiltrated or contained on site, it's not a discharge, and we have no issue with it whatsoever. If they are discharging off site, it will be an enforcement action.
Okay, even if they're using good BMPs.
Yes.
All right, because they are basically discharging without a permit.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so I do know something about those CTR levels, and I know they're very hard to meet.
Yes.
Especially for some of the metals. Now, the analyticals that we're submitting, is that from water that is pre-treatment or post-treatment?
That would be what it depends on how you want to do your work. If you could do it post-treatment and you already have your system set up, that's fantastic. But there is a schedule delay related to that. If you're doing post-treatment and you're waiting 30 days for a thing to go active, that has to be basically incorporated into the project schedule.
Okay. And I'm thinking, just based on my experience, a lot of people are going to not be able to meet those CTRs.
That's correct.
And so what is the individual permitting process like?
So I'll give you a little bit of advice or a little bit of guidance to folks. In the 3 years that I've been in this project, we have never issued a dewatering permit. We have never issued an individual NPDES. We work with the project implementers to infiltrate on site. So, I mean, that may be unique to our region, but an individual NPDES is going to take a while.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And is it the stormwater group that actually does the permitting, or with your region, is that a different group?
So in Region 6, we're a much smaller region in terms of population and number of caseworkers and staff. So no, it is the same unit for in the north portion of the region, it would be one unit. In the south portion of the region to be a single unit. So same people. Okay.
Well, that makes it a little easier. Now, you also have a dynamic that a lot of the other regions don't have, and that's snow.
Yes.
And so you have snow melt, and I'm sure you have snow accumulations.
Right.
Now, in the previous permit, snow is considered an impoundment. Of course, in order to activate attachment J, it has to be pumped. But does snow present a unique challenge to projects in your area?
I think it's something to be accommodated. I'm not sure I'd consider it a challenge. I don't consider snow melt a discharge. Obviously, if snow melt is not being controlled and you're creating secondary problems like erosion and whatnot, then it can become an issue. But snow melt in and of itself is just expected, and we don't consider it a discharge.
Okay. All right.
And otherwise, everyone would be.
And typically it's gravity.
Yes.
Typically it's gravity, so it wouldn't trigger attachment J.
Yep.
All right. Well, Jim, anything else we should know about your region when it comes to dewatering?
No, again, I really want to re-emphasize that working with the staff is going to be much easier for everybody involved. We want to promote work happening, and we want to work with the project implementers to figure out the smoothest way to get things going.
All right. Well, good. Well, thank you for joining us today. Let me bring on our fourth person, and that's Erica with San Diego. And so, Erica, welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week. Thank you for being a part of this panel. And you've heard the dialogue. So how does how is San Diego going to handle this?
Yes, we are different than the other regional boards. For strictly 100% stormwater, we would defer to Appendix J. Before I discuss the groundwater portion of our regional board, we have 3 units. I am in the stormwater management unit, and I deal with the phase 1 MS4, the phase 2, the Caltrans MS4, and the IGP and the CGP. So that's how our regional board is set up. We have different units that deal with discharge of groundwater to receiving waters, and that's to the street, the storm drain, because some contractors don't understand the difference, or discharge to land. We have different units. So there's 3 units you may be dealing with for the compliance component. They are both waste discharge requirements. So I'm going to go over the conditional waiver, which is similar to the other regional board, but somewhat different. They're low threat discharges to land. It has a maximum that you can discharge to. It's 5,000 gallons per day up to 180 days continuously. So anything over that, you're going to have to talk to that unit or and us in a stormwater if it's under the construction general permit. I wasn't able to get an answer what happens if you go over that. We have had instances where we have exceeded those, but you would have to talk to that unit and amend it. It requires a notice of intent application. It does require characterization and monitoring, and it does require a fee in accordance with State Water Board NPDES fee, and that's a little difficult because this is a waste discharge requirement. The fee is relative to the threat to discharge. The schedule's complicated, so the unit that handles this particular order will help you with the fee. The fee has to be submitted, and a complete application has to be done before you can discharge. So typically it takes about 30 days. I would plan for about 6 weeks. As with all other regional boards, we have a staffing, certain staff level, and it depends on what those are going on at that time. So communicate with us early. If QSDs feel like they need to identify that, for the SWIP, they should outline what's required so the contractor is aware and describe that. It is only with mechanical pumping, discharge to land of groundwater of mechanical pumping.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause there because the order number, I'm going to give you the order number if you want it. It's, I had it down here a second ago. I don't remember. It's order R9 2019-005. That's our conditional waiver. A lot of contractors think that because the waiver is in there, they don't have to do anything. And so that's not the case. You're going to have to put some effort, submit a notice of intent application, and you may not get it done and approved within the first round. So just be prepared that there'll be questions. I don't know that our unit has ever had like a one and done process. So just be aware of that.
Yeah. All right. So from what I heard you say, just to kind of recap, that's stormwater, 100% stormwater. Even if it's pumped off, it's just attachment J, no
Correct.
separate permit needed. But if it's groundwater or commingled groundwater, you're going to need to look at either this waiver or other permits that may be applicable. And probably the best deal is to contact the regional board and
right. We have a second groundwater extraction permit, and this is either passive or pumped. And this is a really big deal. It's very, it requires a lot of resources. You're going to need a PE report, technical report, a monitoring plan. You're going to have to 100% characterize the groundwater, so that you're going to have to get someone out there to probably do a monitoring well and in order to submit this. So there's a lot of pre-planning with that. The fee is much higher than would be with a conditional waiver. It's a separate unit. The process to obtain a notice of approval is probably up to 3 months.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. And in fact, I had mentioned, and I've mentioned in the training we've been doing on the new permit, of all the areas that concern me the most, attachment J is one of those. And probably the biggest reason was I don't know if the dischargers, nor especially the regional boards, know or anticipated the tsunami that was about to hit them. when it comes to permitting. Now, you four individuals are with the stormwater groups, and so you probably had a little more inkling of what was coming. But I'm wondering about these other departments, if they know what's about to hit them, because, as you mentioned, lots of times the reason it takes some time to get these permits through is staffing. They just have only so many hours per day to get to, process these things. And if we quadruple the amount coming through, I'm thinking things are going to slow down. We're going to have a bottleneck somewhere. So, this is going to be interesting to see how everybody responds to this, regional boards and dischargers alike. So thank you, Erica. Anything else we should know about your program?
Yes, Region 9, the San Diego region, we are predominantly a phase 1 MS4, and where sites may get in conflict with the Appendix J or any of our groundwater extraction permits, is our regional MS4 permit. So if you're in a local agency, for example, the city of San Diego, they may have more stringent discharge requirements than the construction number, and you will need to check with them, because I have had many instances where the city of San Diego will not allow like anything above a 10 NTUs, so be very careful and be very aware, and also contact your local agency, which is the land use authority for your site. In addition, it may be different than other regional boards here. We have they're called areas of special biological significance. That would be the La Jolla Marine area. And there's also one up in Orange County. They have specific requirements from the state for those ASBSs. And if you do not have a specific approval from the State Water Board on that, you cannot discharge to those water bodies. So you also have to be aware where it's going to even after the MS4. So just be cautious about that within our region.
Okay,
so discharge you to a phase 1 MS4, and they get really upset if they don't know what's going on.
So QSDs have a lot to really consider now in these SWIPs. Need to know what regional board you're in. Need to know what MS4, and not only what MS4, but what requirements or prohibitions they have for these types of discharges. Then you need to know how that regional board handles, what permits they require. So there's a lot more research that QSDs are going to have to do ahead of time. And then we got some education to do too, because we can't have, the contractor pulling out the pump just because they got 3 inches of water on the ground. They're going to need to have some other considerations beyond BMP. So thank you so much for your time and participation in this. We're going to wrap this up with just some. We got a couple questions, and Brandon, you heard what the regional boards had to say. What's your thoughts?
Oh, geez. I mean, just in general, I like regional water board approaches, with the flexibility that they have given the other requirements that they may have for their dewatering discharges. So where it may work in one region, it doesn't necessarily work in another. And I think we need that flexibility when it comes to permitting. And then I particularly like, for, example, in region 5 and 9 and 6, where if it's just a stormwater discharge, then attachment J comes into play. But it's when it gets commingled with groundwater, that's when the consideration for other permits comes into play. So.
And attachment J itself also gives the regional boards the ability to customize this a bit.
Correct. Yeah.
So
say dewatering was occurring for just stormwater in a TMDL watershed, it's possible that they would have some concerns about, sediment-laden water, even if it's meeting the 250 NTU for turbidity, carrying some of those pollutants as part of their dewatering discharges. And so they may ask that dewatering to be monitored for that TMDL pollutant.
Okay. So this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Now, we do have some questions. Let's field some of these. They're kind of long, but in the 471 pages of the 2022 CGP, and Brandon, I'm sure you've lived each one of those pages. The term discharge appears a total of 451 times, yet the term is not included in the glossary. Why is that? And does this term have a different meaning based on the section it appears in the permit? For instance, as you described earlier today, you mentioned a dewatering discharge is only a discharge if it leaves the perimeter of the construction site. Is this a case with non-visible pollutant discharges as well? Stormwater discharges, etc.? So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take a stab at answering that. For the first question, why is that? I'm not entirely sure. I actually found that out recently as well when trying to figure out what the definition of discharge was. So in that instance, I would probably just defer to what the definition is in the Clean Water Act and the California Water Code. But the reason why I came to the conclusion that a discharge isn't a discharge unless it leaves the property is because of discharge location is in the permit, in the glossary, and that is defined as a discharge location as a common outlet from construction site drainage area where stormwater, authorized non-stormwater, or dewatering discharges leave the site or project boundary, or enter any on-site waters of the United States, such as a creek that's running through a particular site. And so I kind of levy that definition to explain that discharges kind of were, and it goes with the monitoring requirements as well. We trigger those monitoring requirements at the point where it leaves the site. Now let's see the follow-up questions. Does this term have different meanings based on the section it appears for the permit? Not to my knowledge. I think again, it's just if the discharge is leaving the site, it doesn't really matter if it's stormwater, dewatering, or authorized non-stormwater. All those trigger the monitoring requirements.
Now, can I interject a thought here? So leaving the site means you need to sample it, but it doesn't mean it's actually reaching waters of the U.S., right? It's leaving the site. It may not ever reach waters of the U.S. If it doesn't reach waters of the U.S., then that could then make you applicable for the NONA, right?
Potentially, and we determine that by being hydrologic, or the specific term in the permit is this project, or does this project have the potential to discharge to waters of the United States by being hydrologically connected or in a basin that eventually does drain to waters of the United States. So yeah, in instances, especially in Region 6, there are basins that are not connected to waters of the United States, and they can just have a notice of non-applicability.
Okay, and then that would exempt you from attachment J because you're not under the permit at that point. Correct. However, that might not exempt you from these regional board WDRs and permits that we've been talking about. You'd have to check with each one of those, I imagine.
Yep.
Okay, good. We have a couple more minutes. Let's see. How about the next question here? Also, as a follow-up question, should we notify the State Water Board when a regional board requires the project to comply with a different definition of discharge? I think we just said there isn't a different definition of discharge. Well, but let's continue the question, such as North Coast Water Quality Control Board, which implies that definition of dewatering discharge also applies to water places on site, including dust control water. Sounds like somebody's got some specific experience.
Yeah, and I wish we had regional or the North Coast Regional Water Board on, so they could help answer that. But all I know is that dust control discharges are considered an authorized non-stormwater discharge on site. But to my knowledge, those requirements really apply if it's going to be impacting a waters of the United States or surface waters in general. So Mel, you would have to perhaps follow up with me and the North Coast Regional Water Board.
Okay, and I think we got time for just one quick last one, and this is an interesting one actually. If an additional permit is required, is that the responsibility of the LRP or the contractor?
That is a good question.
It's a
and
good question.
I would lean to it being the legally responsible person for that particular project.
But it may be dependent on what each regional board requires, right? Because the regional board may allow a contractor to pull that permit. Is that true? Possibly? I don't know. It's an interesting question nonetheless, and probably we don't have time to answer it. So maybe just food for thought. Well, I want to just close this by thanking each of you. Thank you, Jim, Jorge, Narissa, Erica, and also Brandon for being a part of this. Your insights were very useful, I think, to helping us navigate this. And we look forward to information coming from the Water Board on helping us to identify the permits and all that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being a part of Stormwater Awareness Week.
Very
Thank
much.
you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. And thank you to all our attendees for being a part of this. And we'll see you in the next workshop.